Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome to another Pulse of Israel. And today, once again, in our ancestral and eternal homeland, today with me is Jeremy Saltan. Shalom, Jeremy.
Shalom. It's great to be with you, Avi.
It is great to be with you again. Always fabulous insight from you from the inside, as you're known, as you like to go by yourself, Knesset Insider, political strategist, consultant in the Yamina party, to defense minister. Is he still defense minister Naftali Bennett, who's about to end his half a year stint there. So what's going on? Where do things stand right now, Jeremy?
Well, where things stand is that we're going to wait to see if we're going to have a vote tonight or not. That's the big question that we're dealing with in the coming hours. There are a few legal hurdles that need to be dealt with because you need to submit coalition agreements 24 hours before the actual vote. So it's possible we'll have the vote tonight at some point after midnight into Friday morning, or it's possible that this will be pushed off to next week. But the good news for the people of Israel is that we still might not know who all the ministers are. We still might not know exactly when it's going to start, but we should have an end to the saga of 3 long elections, and we should have a new government in the coming days.
And you say that even though it looks very much like Yamina will be going into the opposition and not going into this government?
Yeah, because I think the idea of a 4th election is not something the Israeli people support. We're dealing still, even though I know a lot of people feel that we're post-corona, we still are dealing with the economic aspects of what the coronavirus has done and what is continuing to do. There are, of course, certain sectors of the economy who are not going to be able to go back for the foreseeable future. And going ahead and doing a 4th election at this time is not exactly the most responsible thing. So, going ahead and being in the opposition is unfortunately the prime minister's choice. It's not our choice. And it's an important thing to go ahead and say that it's a good thing that there's going to be a government of the state of Israel, a new one, something that we've been waiting for since December of 2018.
Right. So I'm sure a lot of people are confused here. Yamina is supposedly, and again, I'm saying supposedly because I understand politics and I understand Bibi as well. Yamina is supposedly a close ideological partner to Likud and Benjamin Netanyahu, and yet they find themselves going into the opposition. And here you had Ayelet Shaked, who was by most opinions, a very successful justice minister for the right. You had Naftali Bennett, who I think even people in the army and the defense ministry are saying he's one of the best defense ministers Israel has ever had. And here you had Bezalel Smotrich, who in his first and only term as a minister is killing it as transportation minister, working really, really hard for all of Israel. And yet they're about to find themselves in the opposition saying, hey, we didn't get, their claim is Bibi didn't treat us fairly. He didn't give us any serious portfolios to be able to make an influence in Israeli politics, for those who understand Israeli politics. On the other hand, you have Likud and Prime Minister Netanyahu saying, hey, we love you guys. We want you, but you're only 6 seats. We can't give you what you want. You're a tiny party. And this is what we're able to give you. And you're turning that down because you just want seats and power in the government. Can you make some sense out of this salad of 2 different stories going on?
Yeah, of course. I think, as you said, and you articulated it very well, that the ministers of Yamina were the best ministers in this government. If you go back to before we had this entire situation of a year and a half of elections, there were countless polls that were taken before the first election that showed the 2 most popular ministers in the government were Ayelet Shaked when she was in the Justice Ministry, and Naftali Bennett when he was first in the position of education. And of course, that continued in the second round of this government, in which Naftali was named by many people as the best defense minister that we've had of the last 20 years. That's the best defense minister of this generation, right? So you have that, along, as you mentioned, Smotrich's position within the transportation ministry. And seriously, the message that has been made and again, we'll get to the political issue in a minute, is that the people who do a good job in their ministry, that has no influence in terms of what happens after those terms. Meaning the message that is being sent is, if you do a good job in your ministry, that is not any indicator that you deserve to either continue in your position or get promoted. That is a side issue, and it's not taken as part of the process of distributing the portfolios. In terms of the politics, it's very unfortunate that we're outside, because Netanyahu met with Benny Gantz in person time and time again. There were plenty of times where the coalition negotiation teams met without them to go ahead and move forward. Unfortunately, since April 20th, which is the date in which Gantz and Netanyahu signed, there was no meeting in person between Bennett and Netanyahu. There was supposed to be one yesterday. The prime minister decided to cancel it, and that is also unfortunate. Instead, he decided to settle for another phone call. There were never any coalition negotiations that were sent, any teams that were named by Likud to negotiate and bring us into the government. We asked for that several times, but in reality, and we can talk about the political stuff and the positions in a minute, but there was no indication at all from Likud from the minute they signed with Benny Gantz that we were a wanted party within this coalition. And that's unfortunate, because Shas and UTJ did have face-to-face meetings with the prime minister. They did have negotiating teams that were sent to go ahead and make coalition deals, and they did. And unfortunately, that was not what ended up happening. And the Haredi parties are very upset. I'm sure you saw the letter that was signed by Litzman, Deri, and Gafni that said to the prime minister that if really, as the prime minister is saying, the situation is about positions, they're happy to give their positions to us, not to break up the right-wing bloc.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yes, I'm happy to send that to you. Unfortunately, the prime minister ignored that letter, which again, I think is unfortunate. But again, it's the prime minister's government. He's the one who gets to ultimately decide who's a part of this government and who's not. Look, UTJ has 7 seats in this government. They got 7 jobs, right? They got the housing ministry with additional authority. They're able to get the ILA out of the finance ministry. They're able to get a very much enhanced housing portfolio, which I understand is very important to their constituency. They're also able to get the appropriations committee, which of course is more senior than a majority of the positions of minister cabinet seats around the government, because the entire state budget goes through there. The priorities on so many issues are determined around that committee and not around the cabinet table. Besides that, they were able to get also 2 additional deputy ministry positions in important economic areas. Beyond that, they were able to get 2 important committee chairs, including the Law, Justice, and Constitution Committee, which was, of course, the committee chair that we asked for ourselves. So again, when I hear, for 6 MKs, you shouldn't ask for what we asked, which were 4 roles in the government. What ended up happening was UTJ had 7 seats, and they got 7 jobs within this government. And it's similar if you look at Shas. It's similar, of course, if you look at Gesher, a 1 MK party that is getting a ministry. Of course, Labor, a 2-seat party getting 2 ministries. And the same with Derech Eretz, and of course with Blue and White, where virtually every single MK will get a ministry. I understand that there's a fight within the Likud, and there are internal things that the prime minister needs to deal with. But what it comes down to is additional ministries were given to all of the parties during the caretaker government, and not everyone who's a minister can maintain that ministry. I understand that everyone who's currently a Likud minister expects that they're going to maintain that position, but when it comes to the actual requests, or as the Likud wants to look at, demands, and again, I say requests because we never had an actual coalition negotiation. So what we had asked for in order to go ahead and join the government was 2 ministry positions, 1 deputy position, and 1 committee chair for 6 MKs. So that means we would go down from a roll of 3 ministers to 2 ministers. That means that we would go ahead and, despite having many high-profile people, go ahead and decide internally who it is that would get those positions. What the Likud decided to do is to say that what our asking price was too high. You know, the health ministry, when Litzman, who again had 7 seats compared to 6, when he said that he wanted it, it was fine for him to have it. When Bennett wanted it, then it was no longer something that that Netanyahu thought should go to him. And in fact, he didn't even give it to Blue and White as he had said he would. Instead, he gave it to Yuli Edelstein, who of course is a great speaker. And unfortunately, the prime minister is not allowing him to maintain his speaker position. Instead, he's giving that to Yariv Levin, who is also a very good person and definitely to the right of Edelstein on many issues. Although I would expect to see right-wing people in ministries as opposed to a speaker, since the speaker is supposed to be more of a statesman figure who's able to bring compromise from the different factions. I know Yariv very well. He's not that person. I think there will be a lot of interesting developments with him in that position. But again, going back to the health ministry, it's not very clear to me why it is that the Likud had an issue giving it to Bennett when they were happy to give it to Litzman, obviously to give it to Blue and White, or to go ahead and what ended up happening, which was giving it to Edelstein, who didn't even want it because he wanted to remain as speaker. If you look at the second ministry that we were looking for, we asked for Smotrich to maintain his position in transportation. It's amazing to me now how important transportation is. If you talk to all of these ministers who suddenly think that it's the best thing ever, when Smotrich actually took the transportation ministry about close to a year ago, he was mocked by many of the same Likud MKs who suddenly now consider that to be a very important ministry. And in terms of the deputy ministry position, we had not made a final decision where that was going to be. That was up for debate, but the thought process was that it would be in the defense ministry. In the past, we've had the deputy defense minister position, and we would continue that. It's important for us because of issues that have to do with building in Judea and Samaria, when it comes especially to deal with the civil administration of the IDF. A lot of issues have been dealt with us having a deputy minister in that position. And what we asked for is, you know, again, you can't be justice minister since that was given to the left, but Ayelet Shaked wanted to be the chairwoman of the Law, Justice, and Constitution Committee in the Knesset. Again, instead that's being given to UTJ. It's not clear to me why, again, UTJ should have it and we shouldn't, why that's a big ask. Again, this is not something that UTJ said that they are going to, they were happy for us to take it from them. This isn't something that was supposed to go to the Likud. Again, if you go into the nitty gritty details, which as you know, I'm a policy person, I'm a procedure person, a person who likes to go into those nitty gritty details. If you look at all of those things, if there were a coalition, even I believe one coalition negotiation meeting between the teams, I'm sure that our team and their team would be able to, within just a few hours, come up with resolution for all of these issues. Again, the ask compared to the political amount of seats was not a very big one. And I think also the decision to go ahead and break off Peretz and to give him a ministry sort of goes back to this position where, again, Gesher's getting 1 for 1, Labor's getting 2 for 2, UTJ is getting 7 for 7, Shas is getting practically 9 for 9 on their side as well, that everyone is welcome to have an influence on this government and be a part of the direction of this government, except for us.
Yeah, you raised 2 very, very interesting points that I don't think are getting enough attention, but you say them, they're very well said. Point number 1 is no serious negotiations were even offered. There were no serious teams got together, and never even one meeting between Bennett and Netanyahu. So that speaks volumes as opposed to all the others that did have meetings, even Rafi Peretz all night long. I think he had like 2 meetings with Netanyahu, yet Netanyahu never had any meetings with Bennett. So that's one point that you made. And the second point you said in terms of fairness, like on the one hand, it might be acceptable. Okay, maybe we're biting off, we're asking more than we deserve. But on the level of fairness, you're laying out all the other parties, both on right and left, are getting many more positions and positions of influence. And the only party that was not offered any positions of influence or enough according to the fairness of the other parties is Yamina. So those are two very powerful points. What does it look like to Yamina now that that Rafi Peretz broke off? What are the implications there?
There's a lot of internal. You can imagine how the WhatsApps and my morning Zoom meetings. You can imagine what might be said in those closed rooms, if you will. Maybe in a future time, I'll be happy to go ahead and indulge and let you know. What I can tell you at this time is that I know there are many members of the BI2D Central Committee who are demanding that this be brought up for a vote. They want to go ahead and make sure that this goes through the institutions. There is a lot of opposition to the decision by Rafi Peretz, who again is a big IDF hero, but as a politician, he's dealing with not just a lot of internal, I'll call them disagreements with his other partners within Yamina, but also within his own party. Of course, we're an alliance of different parties. Within his own party of BI2D, he's dealing with a lot of stiff. I'm sure at some point, some of those people will probably start to go public themselves, but we'll see what Rabbi Peretz does, if he will bring this to the Central Committee, if he will decide to explain himself to his own voters. It's not very clear to me what's going to be the future of the BI2D, because if he decides not to bring this to the BI2D institutions, and he does decide that he's going to enter the government, I don't know if that means the party still exists. Does it still exist on paper only? It's not very clear to me what happens there. I'm sure that based on also a lot of WhatsApp exchanges I had with BI2D deputy mayors and city council members across the country, that this will be a sort of situation that develops over the next few days, perhaps even the next few weeks. For people who don't know, the BI2D has about 130 local officials that have been elected over the last year and a half, going back to municipal elections at the end of 2008. It'll be very interesting what happens. I can tell you already for myself, I saw some feelers that were sent from Shas in my WhatsApp thing. I think you might see a situation where Likud, UTJ, and Shas utilize this situation to try to go ahead and pick off, again, quite a few local officials that are in some very, very important positions across the country. So we'll see what Peretz does, because the ramification of his decision, because again, the BI2D out of all the parties is the oldest. It goes back in its roots really to the foundation of the Mizrahi in the 1920s. This will be a very interesting situation in terms of the institutions, in terms of the local leadership within the municipalities, and of course, in terms of what the future of religious Zionism is when you have such a split in the political leadership done in such a fashion.
So let me, first of all, my 2 cents that I've been saying from the beginning regarding Rav Rafi Peretz, since he was the Netzig, the leader of the BI2D, is first of all, he is an unbelievable educator. He should have stayed an educator. He's not a politician. I don't know who wrote this. Maybe you wrote this. I don't know. I think or Bezalel Smotrich wrote this. I think it's very correct. Politics is an art, just like anything. There's an art to politics, to being a good politician, the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's an art to being a good politician. And if you ask me, most, if not all, rabbis should not be politicians. They're better off as rabbis, as educators, as inspiring individuals, as leaders in that form, not as politicians. It was sad for me that he even went into that position. I hope finally our national religious public can start to realize, stop it with the rabbis and politics. All right. And if you're going into politics, then stop being a rabbi. You're not going to be both. Okay. I hope people start realizing that. But so I want to go to Tachlis for a second to help people understand. All right. Let's say this is the situation. Of course, things can still change. As of now, it looks as final can be in Israeli politics, even though it can still change.
Yeah.
People ask me, so what do you think, Avi? That Yamina is not part of the government. It's a good government, bad government. So I'd love to hear your 2 cents. My perspective, the second this government was a 50-50 deal with Benny Gantz and blue and white, it's a paralyzed government. Anything we want from the right, if anything, we'll get sovereignty, and it might not be as good as we want. Hopefully we'll get whatever we are able to get. Other than that and dealing with Corona, it's a paralyzed government with the left wing blue and white and the labor ministers doing as much damage as they can in the ministries that they will have power in doing damage in.
Yeah, I mean,
therefore, yeah.
I'll just first start off by saying I agree with your position that rabbis should stay out of politics. I've been very vocal about that position, and I agree with the other aspects that you said in terms of the specific case of Rabbi Rafi Peretz. I think he's one of the few cases in politics where his approval ratings were much higher before he entered politics than afterwards. Usually it's the opposite. You look at many other examples such as Effie Tam. Usually when you have people who are known before they go into politics, people end up liking them more after their achievements there. I'll tell you, sovereignty, before I talk about in general the position of the government, sovereignty is something that really is worrisome, and I think this is an opportunity to sort of air out some of this dirty laundry. We asked in the conversations that we had, what is it when we're talking about a sovereignty government, what is it exactly? Because as I'm sure you know, was not in the coalition guidelines that were released last night.
Yeah, I was extremely surprised to hear that and to see that, because part of the agreement between Likud and blue and white, it's in the agreement between blue and white. So why would it be in the agreement between blue and white, but not in the government guidelines?
My understanding after talking to my friends in blue and white is that they asked for it not to be in there and the Likud agreed. That's what came down to. I'll say the Likud wanted it, but in the end, they allowed blue and white to dictate that issue. And again, I'm fearful that that's going to be a sign of things to come. But specifically on the sovereignty issue, you were mentioning the coalition agreement. What was decided is that we cannot have a discussion or a vote on it until July. And what we've seen in public statements by members of the left who are in this government, if it's Amir Peretz, if it's Itzik Shmuley, if it's Gabi Ashkenazi, Benny Gantz, they're going to do everything in their power to put sticks within the wheels to prevent this from moving forward. Again, these are public statements. They are not sources close to. These are not, situations where you're briefing the journalists and asking to keep it ambiguous. And I can tell you also, if there are meetings that they have with diplomats, as you know, I'm one of the few people on the right that is more or less is welcome as part of an open door policy in a majority of the embassies and diplomats' houses here in Israel. On the right, it's a situation that they're saying also to them, don't worry, we'll take care of annexation. It won't happen. And this is something that's very worrisome to us because, again, going back to what we asked about, we asked, is this going to be a situation where the vote, which is going to be coming based on what we saw in the coalition agreement, is it going to be over all of the settlements in Judea and Samaria? Are we going to be applying sovereignty only to the Jordan Valley? There was a public statement by Amir Peretz that it seemed like it was only going to be the Gush Etzion area. There's a lot of stuff that's just not clear. We requested clarity on this issue. You're saying that we don't want to be a part of the sovereignty government. We want to know what that actually means. What is it when you're talking about sovereignty? Are we talking about it being, and there was an argument that was going on in the press between different journalists here and there. Is it going to be that we can only apply sovereignty if we agree to the Trump plan and the establishment of the Palestinian state? This is a quid pro quo. Like what's happening here? We never got answers on that, which is very worrisome. And then I saw this morning, I saw Lahav Harkov She put out a tweet and later an entire article that U.S. officials, and we just know Pompeo was here, so we can guess who those U.S. officials are, said that Israel's actually not made a decision yet in terms of what they call annexation, we call applying Israeli sovereignty. And this again, this raises alarm bells. Look, let's put the cards on the table here. Netanyahu for years was against applying sovereignty. He was. When Bennett would talk about it, he would be ridiculed. Sources close to the prime minister would say very crazy things about him, call him, someone who's messianic and so on and so forth. We were very happy to see the Likud go ahead and adopt our policy positions. That's really what you want to see in any political party that's ideological, where you see the large party taking your position. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now, based on a lot of these statements and a lot of the conduct that we've seen over the last few weeks, is it's very possible that this is not going to happen. We did have from Pompeo publicly him saying that July 1st is not a holy date. So again, we're already seeing indications that everything that has been promised is not actually going to happen. And whether we are in the coalition or the opposition, what I can tell you, and this is a commitment, and Naftali has said this on countless occasions, we will support any vote that comes up to apply sovereignty, whether it's an incremental or it's not. But what it comes down to is we wanted to have influence on this government. It looks like this government, you're talking about the direction of this government, it does not look like this is a government that's going to apply sovereignty. Yes, if you listen to the right-wing people within the government, if you listen to Zev Elkin, Tzipi Chotoveli, Yuli Edelstein, it sounds like that's what's happening. You talk to the people on the left, they say they're going to put their foot down when the time comes and prevent it. Who's going to be right? I don't know. The role that we will be able to play if we are in the opposition is to go ahead and keep Netanyahu honest, to go ahead and to be the compass that shows him, unfortunately from the opposition, not from the coalition, where it is that he should be going on these issues, what it is that he should be presenting to the left side of his government. This 50-50 split of giving the left not just 50% of the government, but giving them the defense ministry, the justice ministry, the foreign ministry, the economy ministry, the welfare ministry. Again, these are positions going to straight up leftists. I'm not talking to the parv vanilla people in blue and white. The Labor Party is getting economy and they're getting welfare. Nissenkorn, the head of the labor trade union formerly, is getting the justice ministry. He's the most furthest to the left within the blue and white faction, and he's getting that critical area. We're talking before why the transportation ministry became such a big fight. It became such a big fight because all of those positions of influence were given to the left. And when you go to the right-wing bloc, where are the areas of influence? Well, Aryeh Deri is going to be the one who's in charge of the interior. So he's going to be dealing with really, if you ask me, that's the most senior position that the right was able to go ahead and hold on to. And again, like I said, he'll have a lot of opportunities to bring in, I think, a lot of former Bayit UD members, assuming Peretz is going to go about things as I expect him to. And on the other side of that, you have housing, which of course is really the number one need for a majority of Israelis living here in this country today. And that's going to UTJ. And it just made sense that health would go, so we would be able to have something of influence within this government, which again, if we would join, we would have to accept a lot of these positions going to these people. And in terms of the direction, look, I can just refer to the coalition guidelines. There was a page and a half that went out. It's very clear if you read that although there are things that I'm very happy to see, such as the Aliyah that was mentioned there, in terms of values of Jewish tradition and whatever, there are some nice things there. When it comes to actual policy, we do not see a lot of policy in the coalition guidelines. What we see is more or less a situation where each minister is going to be their own chief within their ministry. And this is something that worries me, because if we're going to see left-wing justices appointed because of Nissenkorn in justice, if we're going to see a change of our diplomats' official positions, because of Ashkenazi, if we're going to see an anti-settlement policy because of Gantz in defense, then I think quite a few people are going to be, again, looking towards us as that moral compass to try to show Netanyahu the way of where it is that he should go. So it's about being an opposition that is not an opposition for the sake of being an opposition. It's about being a moral, ideological compass to show him which way he should be going.
It sounds to me you're basically saying the decision Yamina has just made is we will be able to make more of a difference and influence on this government in the opposition than with the no power positions and no say policy wise if we be in the government. Is that basically it?
Yeah, basically, for those people who don't know, even when you're in the opposition, there are positions that you get in the opposition. There are committee chairs in the opposition. And this is a point that I don't think has been made well enough. If you are going to offer Yamina a situation in which the roles of the government you give them provide them less influence on the government and less of an ability to impact the direction of the government than you would get from sitting in the opposition, then in fact, that isn't really an offer at all. That's sort of a situation in which you are, how can I put it? You're offering your kid the privilege to throw out the garbage can, just because you don't want to actually go ahead and do it.
I never even thought about that before, but you're saying even in today's opposition of where Yair Lapid is the head of the, I think he's going to be the head of the opposition, and Avigdor Lieberman, and then the Arab parties, that Yamina will get influential roles of committees in the opposition, that they more influential than if they would have been in the government?
Yes, I'll give you some examples. First of all, deputy ministers and ministers cannot get committee positions, right? So that means that if, for instance, we would have entered the government with what was offered, you would have had a situation where we'd only have 2 MKs that could get any regular MK position slots. That means that we might not have representation on the Appropriations Committee, the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee, on many other important influential places where crucial votes are taking place. Deputy ministers are very interesting. If you give them specific authority and responsibility, then it can be something that is able to serve your constituents. However, if you just give someone a deputy ministry without authority or responsibility, in essence, what you're doing is providing them with a very nice office with extra assistants and a driver, but you're not actually able to propose any legislation as a deputy minister. You're not allowed to be a member of any Knesset committee. And because you're a deputy minister and you're not a minister, you cannot go to any of the government meetings, any of the cabinet meetings, meaning you have no influence on what is actually happening within the government. So when you're in the opposition, you can first of all get the committee chairs that are offered to the opposition. Obviously, the State Comptroller Committee is a big one. I don't know if you remember when Uri Ariel was the State Comptroller Committee chairman during the time of towards the end of the 2009-2013 term, after Shaul Mofaz brought Kadima into the government in 2012. So again, we saw that when the opposition is smaller, the positions of the opposition need to be distributed, whether the majority of the opposition, as it was at that time, were Arab and left-wing parties. You still need to give the right something within the opposition, and there will be distribution of positions within the opposition, similar to there was one in the coalition. So if you're going to offer a deal in the coalition where you're going to have less influence, and again, it's quite ironic, right, to be in the government and have no influence. But I remember a time when Bayit Yehudi in that government, you had Daniel Hershkovitz, who was the Minister of Science and Technology, and Uri Ariel, as the chairman of State Comptroller Committee, actually had more influence on the direction of the government than Hershkovitz did as a minister. And I remember also that year in 2012 of the filibuster, That was the first time the Netanyahu government had to deal with a legislative, failure, really, in which we were able to go ahead and get a lot of the things that we wanted done, just so that they would be able to go ahead and vote on the things before the deadline. So it's quite interesting. This isn't getting a lot of play, but yes, the opposition a lot of times can offer you more influence and more on the direction of the government than the coalition.
Interesting. So Jeremy, what do you tell people now? All right. Based on the reality, I'm not going to go what I want. Life is not all about what we want. It's about what the art of the possibility, right? Out of all the realistic options, what was offered to us, Bibi Netanyahu was the best option for prime minister, right? Otherwise, it was Gantz and a left-wing government. So now we have a paralyzed, what I'm not even calling a right government, I'm calling it center-left, or a paralyzed center-left government, where Yamina is going to be in the opposition. What words of hope do you have to tell people that even though we're in a situation with close to 70 potential right-wing votes that could have made a right-wing government, made the changes necessary, security, defense, economy, sovereignty, etc. Political constellations did not allow that. This is our reality. What hope do we have? What words of optimism do we have of moving forward with that constellation of the government?
Look, what I told a lot of people who asked me this morning is, it's good that we have a government in Israel. This is a bad government. We're going to do what we can to make this a better government. Unfortunately, we're going to have to do that from the opposition. But what it comes down to is, we should be happy as Israeli citizens that we're not going to a fourth election. And that's the bottom line. And yes, there are compromises that everyone needed to make in order to make this happen. Ultimately, what happened was, yes, in the Likud, they decided it was more important to find a position for Gila Gamliel and Ophir Akunis over finding a position for Naftali Bennett or Ayelet Shaked. But again, that's the prime minister's choice. He's the one who's forming the government. It's his government. It's not the government in which we're able to go ahead and make the rules. What we're going to go ahead and do is be a representative of the right wing. That is what our job was, has been, and will always be. And here it'll be key, because I'll tell you, as someone who's been in both the coalition and the opposition, in the coalition, a lot of times you need to make compromises in order to get things done. It's a very difficult business politics. Again, it's very different from the Beit Midrash. It's very different, Avi. You need to go ahead and a lot of times make decisions based on your values of what is more important than another. It is not a place that is a place for picnics. Well, the good thing that comes out of this is that we are able to speak our voice without fear of consequence, okay? Naftali Bennett can get up on that Knesset podium and now say exactly what he thinks and feels without any fear of retribution. He cannot be fired by Netanyahu. He no longer works for the government. He can go ahead and really go ahead and map out that vision which I believe the great majority of people who are members, who are voters of the right-wing bloc want to see. And just as we've seen in recent years, Yair Lapid present a left-wing alternative to what the government was, what we will be able to do is present a right-wing alternative. If it works out, if we get enough support, if we're able to go ahead and be honest with everyone around us and talk about what happens, and also about what happened that perhaps we were quiet about over the years, perhaps we will be able to get the faith and the trust and the loyalty of the right-wing bloc. And in the future, when we do have an opportunity to go ahead and go into an election, when the country can actually stand it, then in a situation like that, we'll be able to enact the policies that we all care about. Because like I said, unfortunately, even if sovereignty does not happen as it's supposed to this year, that we will be able to get enough support around us so that when it's our turn, we will be able to make sure that that happens.
Okay. All right. Listen, some people have asked some good questions. Can I ask you some questions
Sure.
from the comments?
Go for it.
Oh, this is an interesting question. Did people who vote for Bennett waste their vote?
why would they have wasted their vote? Again, anyone who voted for Bennett because they wanted to see the values, the platform that we put out actually be enacted within the government. It's unfortunate the Likud has not come up with a party platform since 2009, but the good part about Likud not going ahead and coming out with a portfolio since 2009 is the ability that we've been able to have a lot of influence on the direction of this government. And what I think is that anyone who voted and feels that those values are of most importance, we'll see that a lot of times for us to be able to get that done, sometimes that does mean that we'll have to do it from outside the coalition.
So let me follow that up with a hardball question for you, because people on at least one of the Likud talking points right now, I think from what I've seen, is saying, hey, Bennett, you've brought this upon yourself. The first election, we would have had a right-wing government if you would not have been hubris and gone off and broke off Yamina from the Jewish Home Party. It's because you broke off Yamina and then we didn't have enough votes that we did not have the right-wing government. We have to go to a second election. So they're saying here again, Bennett's it's his hubris. He just wants more. And it's his fault that we're in this situation and we have the government because of what Bennett put us through these past 3 elections.
You know, it's amazing to me because, you know, that obviously comes from the premise that the Likud doesn't want anything, that the Likud doesn't have interests. Obviously, every politician is looking to represent their constituency, and they're looking to go ahead and look out for their interests. And the reason we did not pass the threshold is because Netanyahu decided to campaign to the right. He decided to promise people sovereignty. We did not see sovereignty after he promised that. What he decided to do again is adopt all of our policy points, which we were very happy to do. Look, Netanyahu has a great opportunity here. If he goes ahead and he implements our entire policy as he's promised for the last few elections, then you know what? He's going to be in a great position going into the next election. The thing is that I don't believe it. I don't think you believe it. I don't think the people who are spreading the Likud talking points believe it either. What it comes down to is there's a personal animosity that a lot of people within the Likud camp have towards Naftali Bennett. It might be jealousy, envy. I don't know what it is. What it comes down to is the Israeli people, like I said, poll after poll, are very happy with the conduct of what Naftali Bennett has done as a minister. A lot of these people, they had an opportunity in their ministries to go ahead and to do reforms and to do good things. They didn't. Okay. So it's very easy to go ahead and beat up on the person who's doing a good job, as opposed to looking in the mirror and asking, perhaps the stuff that Naftali Bennett is saying is true. Perhaps we should look about why it is that we're not applying Israeli sovereignty now. Perhaps we should go ahead and look at ourselves and say, why is it that we're saying that the national religious matter so much, but now we're going to go ahead and give them even worse positions than we offered Yamina to begin with, within the beginning of this coalition negotiation process. So, you know, if Netanyahu would have acted differently and done what he should have done, which is go to the center, try to get the center right votes, we would have had quite enough votes to be able to form a government in the first election. He made a decision to go ahead and campaign on the right, embrace our entire platform, promise all of those things in order to put us under the threshold. And then in the end, he did not enact any of those policies. And instead of going ahead and staying true to the people who enabled him to become prime minister, he made a decision to go ahead and sign with Benny Gantz.
Interesting. All right, here we have some questions. This is somewhat specific questions for, I guess, Yamina, National Religious, Bayit Yehudi parties. Why does the National Religious Rabbis continue to give Naftali support? Why do we trust Peretz after reneging on his agreement with Itamar Ben-Gvir and now the party as a whole? We need new leadership, or the religious right will be represented only by the Likud left.
So again, I feel that it's pretty clear the reason that a majority of the national religious rabbis came out, and of course they did so in letters, they did so also in phone calls to the prime minister, saying that they do support the position that we should go to the opposition unless we're given an ability to influence, is the fact that they felt that they could influence more from the opposition than from the coalition. Look, there are deals that are brokered in the appropriations committee before every budget. A lot of rabbis understand they might be able to get more money for their institutions if we're in the opposition compared to the coalition. If we're not going to be offered enough to be able to actually provide for our constituents, so you can't expect them to decide to just go there and again take positions like deputy ministers that have no influence at all and are just there so that you can get some extra assistance and a driver. In terms of the claim of Likud being the home of religious Zionism, look, Yuli Edelstein, number 2 in Likud, he's a guy who wears kippah, a person who I really like. I think he's one of the most talented politicians. I think he's also the front runner to become the next president. Unfortunately, what I see is that Netanyahu ousted him from the speaker position, which to me is outrageous because Edelstein is the reason why we have this national unity government.
Right.
And we talked about that in previous things. I'm not going to go back into this now, but you can send them a link to that previous episode of our talks. And the situation is the thanks that he gets for keeping Netanyahu as prime minister is that he's getting booted from his position as speaker. I'm already hearing that there's a lot of movement to also sabotage his candidacy for presidency, similar to what Netanyahu did to Rivlin before the last term for the president election in 2014. So it's quite clear that Netanyahu does not view at least most senior person within national within religious Zionism as someone who he sees as a partner. If anything, he's done everything possible to send out talking points against him. I'm sure you remember the days in which he was even trying to oust him from the speakership and sending all of the Likud rapid response team on social media to destroy Edelstein, completely bringing up things from his past and so on and so forth, which I found disgusting personally. Look, Zev Elkin, who's another great guy, religious Zionism, it looks like he's only going to be environment minister in this next government, which I think is a complete waste of his talents. He's a very talented person.
Likud politicians.
It's amazing. Instead, he's going to be in the environment. You can ask any of your viewers who follow UK politics what it is about what you say about the person you appoint to the environment ministry. That's usually the most embarrassing position you give to people for many reasons. That's UK tradition. And let's look at Tzipi Hotovely, who looks like she's being booted away from her position as a minister completely. If you're looking at the rookie Likud MKs who are religious Zionist members, my understanding is none of them are going to get a committee chairmanship. Again, I've heard this from a lot.
Not going to get a committee chairmanship? I missed that.
I said that out of the rookies, none of the Likud religious Zionist rookies are going to get a committee chairmanship. It's going to go to the secular ones. So again, if Likud is really a party that's a partnership between religious and secular, it's quite clear that although Likud is happy to get the votes of the religious public, they're not happy to distribute the positions of influence within that area. I mean, again, it's just amazing to me. The guy who's number 2 in Likud, who is a guy who's wearing a kippah, is being told that he is being ousted from his position, and he's not even getting the most senior positions that are available within the Likud. Instead, those are going to loyalists such as Amir Ohana, who again is a great guy, but is about as far away from religious Zionism as you can get. So look, people who care very much about that issue of the interests of the religious Zionism can just not go ahead and sit there with a straight face and pretend that the Likud has done anything for them in the past, or that in this coming government that Rafi Peretz is a smart enough politician to be able to get them anything moving forward.
All right. This is more of a comment, but I think it's a comment that you'll enjoy responding to. I think this coalition will end up destroying the Likud brand and boost all the other right-wing parties, particularly Yamina, since Bennett was smart enough not to give a left-wing government right-wing cover. Sadly, this might result in losing the chance for sovereignty. Thoughts on that comment?
Well, look, in terms of losing the fight for sovereignty, again, I think I was clear. I don't know if that person was there in the beginning. I talked about it. You should go back and listen. we're going to first of all support sovereignty, whatever it is, in parts, whole thing, whatever it is. That's a big part of who we are. We're going to do that from the coalition or the opposition. Unfortunately, when we asked for clarifications about that, we didn't get any. So if there isn't going to be any sovereignty, it's not going to be because we're in the opposition. If anything, maybe we're in the opposition because we're not going to see sovereignty. It's possible also that Gantz put a veto on us, similar to how Ehud Barak, who was defense minister in the second Netanyahu government from 2009 to 13, put on Ketzele and Uri Ariel a veto because he did not want to have the real members of the religious Zionist community within the government. In terms of the other aspects there, yeah, look, like I said, if you're providing a right-wing alternative, if you're showing where it is the Likud should have been, but decided not to go, the voters are smart people. They're going to see that. They're going to see that vision, and they're going to look back to our record. Look, if you go back and you look at the last 7 years closely, you will see that it's very clear every time the government moved to the right, it was Bennett and Shaked, along with Smotrich, and before him, Uri Ariel, as well as other members such as Uri Orbach, Zichrono Livracha, were the ones that moved him to that position. He always started out to the left, and we moved him to the right. We're going to try to do the same thing from the opposition. It's possible we're going to be successful. It's possible we're not going to be successful. If we're successful, we're going to be happy that he adopted our policies. If he's not going to be successful, then I agree. I think the Likud is going to take a very big hit, and we will go ahead and we will grow in the next election, and rightfully and justifiably so. And it'll be very difficult for people to explain why it is that the Likud is right when they gave in to all of the left-wing things, when again, we provided a clear picture of what could have been done.
Okay, and this is a comment that you've basically answered to, but it's a Yamina voter, so I want to give them the chance to say it and for you to be able to respond. It really disappoints me as a Yamina voter. Decisions are made by what ministry is received as they didn't get what they want, then they go to the opposition. As much as I don't like Bibi, Likud in the current government is not left-wing, and Yamina's place is in the government, not in the opposition next to Lapid.
So I think that's an important point. The nuance of that point is the word ministries. And this was also in the Netanyahu talking points, right?
Yeah.
Instead of bringing Netanyahu, instead of bringing Bennett to a meeting in his office, he spent the time last night putting out a TV video, against Yamina. Again, he could have used that time to bring them in. Instead, he was sending out these messages. We asked for 2 ministries. 2 ministries for 6 seats is not a very big ask. It's again, if you look also against previous governments, this is the normal key that you're looking at of 1 ministry for every 3 MKs. A majority of Netanyahu's governments were built on that key, on that scale. What you have here is that what we were looking for were positions of influence. Now, as a Yamina voter, what this writer wanted to see is us as a part of the government enacting those policies. But again, my question to that Yamina voter would be, tell me, is it worth it to just enter the government and then instead of being senior partners, be considered just, delegated to junior allies in which we have no say in terms of what happens? We have no ability to go ahead and move the government, to go ahead and enact the things that you're looking for as a Yamina voter. The coalition opposition question is an important one. It's not an easy one. But overall, what people vote on, I believe, is not based on coalition opposition, is based on them seeing their policy objectives accomplished. It's very possible that we'll get to that very crucial time, months from now, in which, because we were in the opposition, we were able to enact sovereignty from the opposition by forcing the coalition's hand. If something like that happens, you're going to go ahead and be very thankful that we were in that position. For us to just go ahead and join for the sake of joining with no impact on the direction or influence of this government would have been a betrayal to you as a voter.
That's a fabulous, very well explained answer. Jeremy Saltan, thank you so much for your time, for your insights. Again, this could be final. It might not be final. Well, if we have to have another talk next week about changes, we will do so. But again, thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with you. And thanks everyone who tuned in to listen, whether it was live or afterwards.
And also all of you viewers, live or afterwards, thank you for watching. Signing off from the eternal and ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. This is Avi Abelow for today's Pulse of Israel. Take care, everyone. Shalom.